The control tower's emergency alarm pierced through the humid Florida night like a banshee's wail. Captain Ryan Fletcher's voice crackled through the radio, panic evident in every syllable as his FA-18 Super Hornet pitched violently through the storm-ravaged sky above Whitmore Naval Air Station. Lightning split the darkness, illuminating the sleek fighter jet as it struggled against microbursts that could crush aircraft like tin cans. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. In the tower, seasoned controllers watched their screens with growing dread, knowing they were witnessing the kind of training exercise that could end in tragedy. But what none of them realized was that salvation would come from the most unlikely source imaginable: a quiet woman in janitor's coveralls who had been emptying trash cans just moments before, carrying secrets that could change everything. The fluorescent lights of Whitmore Naval Air Station's main administrative building cast harsh shadows across the polished linoleum floors as Delilah Vasquez pushed her cleaning cart down the empty corridor. At 58, she moved with the deliberate pace of someone who had learned that steady persistence accomplished more than rushed enthusiasm. Her graying hair was pulled back in a practical bun beneath a worn baseball cap, and her navy blue coveralls bore the patches and stains that spoke of countless nights spent maintaining the pristine appearance that military installations demanded. To anyone who bothered to notice her at all, Delilah appeared to be exactly what her identification badge proclaimed: a member of the night shift custodial crew, invisible in the way that essential workers often become in environments focused on more dramatic pursuits. The evening shift at Whitmore was always quieter than the bustling activity of daytime operations, but tonight carried an energy that Delilah recognized from her years of working around aviation personnel. Young pilots were preparing for advanced carrier landing practice, the kind of training that separated competent aviators from those who would earn their wings aboard the massive aircraft carriers that projected American naval power across the world's oceans. The exercises pushed both aircraft and pilots to their limits, simulating the precise timing and split-second decision-making required to land a 30-ton fighter jet on a moving ship in open seas. Delilah's cart squeaked slightly as she navigated toward the Flight Operations Center, a sound that had become as familiar to the night staff as the distant rumble of jet engines warming up on the tarmac. Her route took her past briefing rooms where pilots studied weather reports and mission parameters, their conversations floating through thin walls as she emptied wastebaskets and wiped down surfaces with methodical efficiency. Most personnel barely acknowledged her presence, treating custodial staff with the polite indifference that military culture reserved for civilian contractors, who kept the base functioning behind the scenes. Captain Ryan Fletcher emerged from briefing room Charlie as Delilah approached, his flight suit crisp and his confident stride marking him as one of the promising young aviators who represented the future of naval aviation. At 26, Fletcher possessed the kind of natural flying ability that instructors noticed immediately, combined with the academic intelligence that suggested a career destined for leadership positions. His record showed exceptional performance in flight school, outstanding marks in advanced tactical training, and the kind of cool-headed decision-making that earned respect from senior officers who had seen countless promising pilots wash out under pressure. "Evening, ma'am," Fletcher nodded politely as he passed Delilah in the hallway, his tone carrying the respectful courtesy that well-trained officers showed to all personnel regardless of rank or position. His mind was clearly focused on the challenging training mission ahead, reviewing the complex procedures required for carrier landing practice in conditions that would test every skill he had developed during months of intensive preparation. Delilah returned his greeting with a quiet smile that suggested someone accustomed to brief interactions with personnel whose attention was focused elsewhere. "Good luck with your training tonight, Captain," she replied, her voice carrying a warmth that spoke of genuine care for the young aviators who risked their lives pursuing excellence in one of the most demanding professions imaginable. What Fletcher couldn't have known was that Delilah's casual well-wishes carried weight that extended far beyond polite conversation. Her eyes had automatically assessed his posture, noting the slight tension in his shoulders that suggested someone pushing through fatigue, and the way his hand unconsciously checked his flight gear with the repetitive precision of someone whose confidence masked underlying nervousness about the challenges ahead. These observations came naturally to someone who had spent decades evaluating pilot readiness, though her current position required keeping such assessments to herself. Lieutenant Sophia Reeves joined Fletcher as they headed toward the flight line, her own demeanor reflecting the focused preparation that characterized pilots who took their responsibilities seriously. As his assigned wingman for the evening's training, Reeves brought her own impressive credentials to the mission, including specialized training in adverse weather, flying that would prove crucial given the meteorological conditions developing over the Gulf of Mexico. Her presence provided the kind of experienced backup that allowed younger pilots to push their boundaries while maintaining the safety margins that prevented training exercises from becoming real emergencies. The two pilots disappeared through the doors leading to the flight line, leaving Delilah alone in the corridor with her cleaning supplies and the kind of institutional quiet that filled military buildings during shift changes. She continued her rounds with practiced efficiency, but her attention had shifted to the subtle signs that indicated tonight's training would present challenges beyond the normal parameters of carrier landing practice. The weather briefings she had overheard suggested developing storm systems that could create the kind of atmospheric instability that turned routine exercises into tests of survival skills. Colonel Marcus Brennan's office occupied a corner of the administrative building, where large windows provided panoramic views of the flight line and the Gulf of Mexico beyond. As base commander, Brennan carried responsibility for every aspect of operations at Whitmore, from maintaining readiness standards that met fleet requirements to ensuring that training exercises provided realistic preparation without unnecessary risks to personnel or equipment. His 23 years of naval service included combat deployments, test pilot assignments, and command positions that had earned him reputation as someone who balanced aggressive training standards with genuine concern for the aviators under his command. Delilah knocked softly on Brennan's office door before entering to empty his wastebasket, a task that had become routine during her 18 months as part of the custodial staff. The colonel looked up from weather reports spread across his desk, his expression showing the kind of concern that experienced commanders developed when atmospheric conditions approached the margins of safe flying weather. "Looks like we might have some interesting conditions tonight," Brennan commented, his tone suggesting someone thinking aloud rather than seeking conversation with custodial staff. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. These storm systems are developing faster than the meteorologists predicted, and the wind shear data is starting to look concerning. Delilah paused in her work, her expression showing the kind of respectful attention that military protocol demanded when senior officers shared their thoughts. "The young pilots seem well prepared, sir," she replied quietly, her observation carrying the measured tone of someone who had observed countless training cycles and understood the dedication required to master naval aviation. Brennan nodded absently, his attention returning to the weather data that would determine whether the evening's training proceeded as scheduled or required modifications to ensure pilot safety. What he couldn't have realized was that Delilah's comment reflected professional assessment rather than civilian observation, based on evaluation criteria that few people outside the pilot community would recognize or understand. The operations center adjacent to Brennan's office buzzed the controlled activity that characterized military installations preparing for complex training missions. Flight controllers reviewed radar data and communication protocols while maintenance personnel completed final inspections of aircraft that represented some of the most advanced aviation technology in the world. The FA-18 Super Hornets, scheduled for tonight's exercises, embodied decades of aerospace engineering advancement, capable of performance that pushed the boundaries of what human reflexes could control under extreme conditions. Major Vincent Torres supervised the operations center with the kind of attention to detail that had earned him recognition as one of Whitmore's most effective training coordinators. His background included carrier deployments, advanced tactical training, and administrative assignments that provided comprehensive understanding of the complex factors that determined training mission success. However, his recent focus on efficiency metrics and cost-effectiveness had begun to create tension with pilots, who felt that safety considerations were being subordinated to schedule pressures and budget constraints. Torres reviewed the evening's flight schedule with satisfaction, noting that the planned exercises would provide valuable training while meeting the statistical requirements that enhanced his performance evaluations. The developing weather conditions presented challenges, but his assessment suggested that competent pilots should be able to complete their training objectives without significant modifications to established procedures. His confidence reflected the kind of administrative perspective that sometimes overlooked subtle factors that could transform routine training into emergency situations. Dr. Patricia Keller arrived at the operations center, carrying meteorological reports that painted a more concerning picture of the atmospheric conditions developing over the training area. As Whitmore's senior flight engineer, Keller possessed specialized knowledge of weather patterns and aircraft performance parameters that often provided early warning of potentially dangerous situations. Her analysis suggested that the evening's training missions were approaching the margins of safe operating conditions, though her concerns competed with schedule pressures that made training delays politically complicated. "Major Torres," Keller began, her voice carrying the professional urgency of someone whose technical expertise demanded attention. "These latest weather reports show microburst activity developing much faster than predicted. The wind shear measurements are approaching levels that could challenge even experienced pilots, and our scheduled training area is directly in the path of the most severe conditions." Torres reviewed Keller's data with the kind of cursory attention that busy administrators often gave to technical concerns that complicated operational schedules. "Dr. Keller, I appreciate your analysis, but these pilots are training for carrier operations where weather conditions are rarely ideal. Tonight's conditions provide realistic preparation for the kinds of challenges they'll face during actual deployments." The exchange reflected a fundamental tension that existed throughout military aviation between those who prioritized aggressive training standards and those who emphasized safety margins that prevented training accidents. Both perspectives carried merit, but the balance between realistic preparation and unnecessary risk required constant evaluation, based on factors that were often difficult to quantify precisely. Delilah finished her cleaning duties in the operations center as this conversation unfolded, her movements efficient and unobtrusive while her attention processed details that revealed the developing situation. Her position as custodial staff provided access to information and discussions that civilian contractors rarely encountered, though her apparent disinterest in technical matters concealed the professional assessment she was conducting based on decades of experience with aviation operations. The flight line outside presented a scene of controlled preparation as ground crews completed final inspections of aircraft that would soon challenge both pilot skills and engineering limits. The FA-18 Super Hornets gleamed under the harsh illumination of work lights, their sleek profiles suggesting the kind of technological sophistication that transformed human pilots into extensions of machines capable of performance that defied common understanding of physics and aerodynamics. Sergeant Tommy Nakamura supervised the maintenance crews with meticulous attention to detail that reflected his 15 years of experience, keeping naval aircraft operational under conditions that ranged from routine training to combat deployments. His teams checked every system, component, and connection point with the kind of thoroughness that could mean the difference between mission success and condumention success, and quote that the kind of thoroughness that could mean the difference between mission success, catastrophic failure. The responsibility weighed heavily on personnel who understood that pilot lives depended on their expertise and dedication. Fletcher and Reeves completed their pre-flight briefings and began the walk to their assigned aircraft. Their conversation focused on the complex procedures required for carrier landing practice and conditions that promised to test every aspect of their training. The approaching storm systems added variables that would challenge their ability to maintain precision under pressure. But both pilots carried confidence that reflected months of intensive preparation designed to develop exactly these capabilities. As Delilah completed her rounds and prepared to move to the next building on her cleaning schedule, she paused to observe the flight line activity through windows that provided clear views of the preparation taking place. Her expression showed the kind of professional interest that suggested deeper understanding than her position would normally require, though her careful demeanor concealed the assessment she was conducting based on experience that few people at Whitmore could match. The stage was set for an evening that would transform routine training into a test of skills, judgment, and courage that none of the participants fully anticipated. Storm systems gathered strength over the Gulf of Mexico while young pilots prepared to challenge themselves against conditions that would demand everything their training had provided. In the shadows of the administrative building, a custodial worker who appeared to be exactly what she claimed carried secrets that could change everything if circumstances required their revelation. The first hints of the crisis that would soon unfold were already visible to those who knew how to recognize them, though the magnitude of what was approaching remained hidden behind the routine preparations that characterized military training operations. Tonight would prove that expertise and courage could emerge from the most unexpected sources, and that assumptions about capability and authority were sometimes dangerous illusions that reality would shatter without warning. The first signs of trouble emerged 43 minutes into Fletcher's training mission, as his FA-18 Super Hornet encountered atmospheric disturbances that exceeded every parameter outlined in the evening's weather briefing. The microburst activity that Dr. Keller had warned about was intensifying with unprecedented speed, creating pockets of violently descending air that could slam aircraft toward the ocean surface with forces that overwhelmed conventional pilot responses. Fletcher's voice carried increasing tension as he reported conditions that challenged his understanding of what naval aircraft were designed to handle. Delilah had moved her cleaning operations to the control tower building, where her presence went unnoticed among the growing activity of personnel monitoring the deteriorating situation. Her cart positioned near the communications equipment allowed her to hear radio transmissions without appearing to pay attention to operational matters that were supposedly beyond civilian comprehension. The conversations between Fletcher and ground control painted a picture of atmospheric chaos that was developing faster than anyone had anticipated. "Tower, this is Stallion 27. Fletcher's voice crackled through speakers that filled the control room with the sound of someone fighting increasingly difficult conditions. "I'm encountering severe turbulence and wind shear that's making carrier approach procedures extremely challenging. Request updated weather information and possible diversion alternatives." Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh supervised the control room with the kind of calm authority that experienced officers developed when training exercises approached the boundaries of safe operations. Her 21 years of naval service included assignments aboard aircraft carriers, where she had guided pilots through weather conditions that tested both human skill and aircraft capabilities. However, tonight's atmospheric disturbances were proving more severe than standard protocols typically addressed. Stallion 27, stand by for updated meteorological data. Walsh responded with professional composure that concealed growing concern about conditions that appeared to be deteriorating beyond the margins of routine training operations. Current winds are showing significant variance from forecasted parameters, and we're evaluating options for modified approach procedures. The radar displays throughout the control room painted an increasingly ominous picture of weather systems that were intensifying with dangerous speed. What had begun as manageable training conditions were evolving into atmospheric chaos that could challenge even the most experienced carrier pilots. The microburst cells were multiplying and strengthening, creating invisible columns of descending air that could drive aircraft toward the water with forces exceeding anything that normal pilot responses could counteract. Layla's position near the radar operators allowed her to observe the weather patterns developing across the training area, and her expression showed subtle signs of recognition that suggested familiarity with atmospheric conditions that most ground personnel would find difficult to interpret. Her eyes tracked the movement of storm cells with the kind of professional assessment that indicated understanding of how such patterns affected aircraft performance at various altitudes and approach angles. Dr. Keller arrived in the control room carrying updated atmospheric analysis that confirmed her earlier warnings about rapidly changing conditions. Her data showed wind shear measurements that exceeded safe parameters for carrier landing practice, particularly for pilots who lacked extensive experience with extreme weather flying. The situation was evolving beyond routine training challenges into scenarios that could require emergency procedures if conditions continued to deteriorate. "Commander Walsh," Keller announced with urgent professionalism, "the microburst activity is intensifying beyond our most conservative projections. We're seeing downdraft velocities approaching 60 knots, with horizontal wind shear gradients that could overwhelm standard pilot compensation techniques. I strongly recommend immediate termination of training operations and emergency recovery procedures for all airborne aircraft." Walsh reviewed Keller's data with the kind of careful attention that command responsibilities demanded when safety margins were being challenged by conditions beyond normal operational parameters. The decision to abort training missions carried implications that extended beyond immediate pilot safety, affecting training schedules, resource allocation, and readiness evaluations that influenced career advancement and unit effectiveness ratings. Major Torres joined the control room discussion with obvious reluctance to modify training operations that were already behind schedule due to previous weather delays. His perspective reflected administrative pressures that often competed with safety considerations when training objectives conflicted with environmental realities. The balance between realistic preparation and unnecessary risk required constant evaluation, but Torres's recent focus on efficiency metrics suggested someone whose judgment might be compromised by career considerations. "Dr. Keller, while I respect your meteorological expertise," Torres began with the kind of diplomatic language that military officers used when disagreeing with technical recommendations. "These pilots need experience with challenging weather conditions if they're going to be effective during actual carrier operations. Tonight's conditions provide valuable training opportunities that simulate the kinds of atmospheric disturbances they'll encounter during real-world deployments." The exchange that followed revealed fundamental differences in how military personnel assessed risk and training value when faced with conditions that exceeded normal safety parameters. Walsh's command experience provided perspective that balanced aggressive training standards with genuine concern for pilot welfare, while Torres's administrative background emphasized meeting training objectives that enhanced performance evaluations, regardless of environmental challenges. Delilah continued her cleaning duties with apparent disinterest in the technical discussions surrounding her, but her positioning allowed her to monitor both radar displays and radio communications without drawing attention to her presence. Her movements became more deliberate as she processed information that painted an increasingly dangerous picture of conditions developing over the training area. The atmospheric data she was observing matched patterns she recognized from situations that had challenged the most experienced pilots during her previous career. Fletcher's second radio transmission revealed deteriorating conditions that were beginning to exceed his ability to maintain controlled flight through standard procedures. His voice carried increasing stress as he encountered atmospheric disturbances that pushed his FA-18 Super Hornet beyond the performance parameters that routine training had prepared him to handle. The situation was evolving from challenging training exercise to potential emergency that could require intervention beyond normal operational protocols. Tower, Stallion 27 is experiencing severe control difficulties, Fletcher reported with professional calm that couldn't entirely conceal growing concern about his ability to maintain safe flight operations. Wind shear is causing significant altitude and heading deviations that are challenging my ability to maintain approach parameters. Request immediate guidance for alternative recovery procedures. The control room atmosphere shifted as personnel recognized that routine training was transforming into a situation that could require emergency response procedures. Walsh's expression showed the kind of focused intensity that experienced commanders developed when training exercises approached the boundaries of controlled operations. The radio communications revealed a pilot who was struggling with conditions that exceeded his training preparation, though his professionalism suggested someone who was not yet ready to declare an emergency. Lieutenant Reeves provided additional perspective on the deteriorating situation through her own radio transmissions from a position several miles behind Fletcher's aircraft. Her reports confirmed that the atmospheric disturbances were widespread and intensifying, affecting multiple aircraft in ways that challenged standard recovery procedures. The training mission was evolving into a test of survival skills that exceeded the normal scope of carrier landing practice. Tower, this is Stallion 28. Reeves transmitted with the kind of calm professionalism that characterized experienced pilots facing dangerous conditions. I'm observing significant weather activity throughout the training area, with microburst cells that are creating extreme turbulence and wind shear. Recommend immediate vector to alternate recovery procedures for all aircraft in the affected airspace. The radar operators confirmed what the pilot reports were indicating through atmospheric measurements that showed conditions deteriorating beyond safe operational limits. The microburst activity was creating vertical wind movements that could drive aircraft toward the ocean surface faster than pilots could compensate using standard recovery techniques. The situation demanded decision-making that balanced training objectives against pilot safety in circumstances that exceeded normal risk assessment parameters. Delilah's cleaning cart had positioned her near the primary radar display, where she could observe the weather patterns developing across the training area without appearing to focus on operational matters. Her expression showed subtle signs of recognition as she processed atmospheric data that revealed conditions approaching the limits of what even experienced pilots could handle safely. The patterns matched situations she remembered from training scenarios that had challenged the most skilled aviators during her previous career. Commander Walsh made the decision that command responsibility demanded when training exercises approached dangerous conditions that exceeded safe operational parameters. Her announcement reflected the kind of leadership that prioritized pilot safety over administrative pressures when circumstances required immediate action to prevent training accidents. The abort decision would have implications for training schedules and performance evaluations, but the alternative could involve consequences that were far more serious. All Stallion flight aircraft, this is Tower. Walsh transmitted with authority that ended debate about continuing the training mission. Abort current exercise and proceed to alternate recovery procedures. Weather conditions have deteriorated beyond safe training parameters, and immediate recovery is authorized using emergency approach criteria. The radio response from Fletcher revealed a pilot who was experiencing difficulties that exceeded his ability to execute standard emergency procedures. His voice carried stress that suggested someone whose aircraft was being affected by atmospheric forces beyond his training preparation to handle safely. The situation was evolving from aborted training exercise to potential emergency that could require intervention beyond normal operational protocols. Tower, Stallion 27 is unable to comply with standard recovery procedures. Fletcher transmitted with professional calm that couldn't conceal growing alarm about his deteriorating situation. Aircraft control is becoming increasingly difficult due to severe turbulence and wind shear. I may require emergency assistance to complete safe recovery operations. The control room atmosphere became tense as personnel recognized that what had begun as routine training was transforming into a genuine emergency that could challenge the capabilities of everyone involved. Walsh's command experience provided perspective for handling such situations, but the atmospheric conditions were proving more severe than standard emergency procedures typically addressed. The microburst activity was creating forces that could overwhelm conventional pilot responses, requiring techniques that exceeded normal training preparation. Dr. Keller's updated weather analysis confirmed the worst-case scenarios that her earlier warnings had predicted. The atmospheric disturbances were intensifying beyond anything that standard training operations were designed to accommodate, creating conditions that challenged the fundamental assumptions underlying normal flight safety procedures. The microburst cells were generating vertical wind movements approaching hurricane intensity, capable of driving aircraft toward the ocean surface with forces that exceeded human ability to compensate. Commander Walsh, Keller announced with urgent professionalism that reflected the gravity of the developing situation. Atmospheric conditions have deteriorated beyond anything in our historical database for this region. We're measuring downdraft velocities exceeding 70 knots, with horizontal wind shear that creates forces approaching the structural limits of aircraft designed for carrier operations. This situation exceeds the parameters of normal emergency procedures. The implications of Keller's assessment registered throughout the control room as personnel processed the reality that they were facing conditions that exceeded standard training for both pilots and ground support personnel. The situation demanded decision-making and technical expertise that went beyond normal operational protocols, requiring innovation and experience that might not be available through conventional channels. Torres's reaction revealed someone whose administrative perspective had not prepared him for emergency situations that exceeded standard procedural responses. His training emphasized meeting objectives through established protocols, but tonight's conditions were proving beyond the scope of normal emergency procedures. The atmospheric forces affecting Fletcher's aircraft required intervention techniques that weren't covered in standard training curricula or operational manuals. Perhaps we should contact regional emergency services, Torres suggested with the kind of uncertainty that characterized someone facing situations beyond their expertise. This situation appears to require resources and capabilities that exceed our normal operational parameters. The suggestion reflected reasonable thinking, but the timeline involved in coordinating external emergency response would likely exceed the window available for effective intervention. Fletcher's aircraft was being affected by atmospheric forces that demanded immediate action using whatever resources were available at Whitmore Naval Air Station. The situation required expertise and decision-making that couldn't wait for external assistance to arrive. Delilah had moved closer to the primary communications console while maintaining her appearance of routine cleaning duties. Her positioning, allowing her to monitor all radio transmissions without drawing attention to her presence. Her expression showed increasing concern as she processed Fletcher's reports and the weather data being discussed by control room personnel. The atmospheric conditions matched scenarios she recognized from situations that had challenged the most experienced pilots during her previous career. Lieutenant Commander Walsh faced the kind of command decision that defined military leadership when standard procedures proved insufficient for emergency situations, requiring immediate action. Her experience provided perspective for evaluating options that exceeded normal operational protocols, but the atmospheric conditions were proving more severe than anything her training had specifically addressed. The situation demanded innovation and risk-taking that could have career implications regardless of the outcome. Fletcher's third radio transmission revealed a pilot who was struggling with aircraft control problems that exceeded his ability to maintain safe flight operations through standard procedures. The atmospheric forces affecting his FSA-18 Super Hornet were creating control difficulties that challenged fundamental assumptions about pilot training and aircraft capabilities. His voice carried increasing stress as professional composure competed with recognition that his situation was approaching the limits of his ability to handle safely. Tower, Stallion 27 is experiencing severe control authority degradation, Fletcher reported with disciplined calm that couldn't entirely conceal growing desperation about his deteriorating situation. Microburst activity is causing violent altitude excursions that are overwhelming my ability to maintain controlled flight. I may be approaching emergency ejection criteria if conditions continue to worsen. The mention of potential ejection procedures sent a chill through the control room as personnel recognized that the training exercise had evolved into a life-threatening emergency that could result in aircraft loss and pilot casualties. Ejection over ocean waters in severe weather conditions carried risks that could prove as dangerous as attempting to continue flying through atmospheric disturbances that exceeded aircraft design parameters. Walsh's command training provided perspective for handling such emergencies, but the severity of conditions was testing the limits of standard emergency response procedures. The atmospheric forces affecting Fletcher's aircraft required intervention techniques that exceeded normal training preparation for both pilots and ground support personnel. The situation demanded expertise and innovation that might not be available through conventional channels. Delilah paused in her cleaning duties as she processed the radio transmissions and weather data that painted an increasingly dangerous picture of Fletcher's situation. Her expression showed recognition of atmospheric patterns that matched scenarios from her previous experience with extreme weather flying, though her current position required maintaining the appearance of civilian disinterest in operational matters. The conditions developing over the training area were approaching the limits of what even experienced pilots could handle safely. The control room discussion revealed personnel who were beginning to recognize that their standard training and procedures were proving insufficient for the emergency that was developing beyond normal operational parameters. Walsh's leadership experience provided perspective, but the atmospheric conditions were testing everyone's understanding of what naval aviation was designed to handle. The situation was evolving into a test of capabilities that exceeded normal training preparation. Dr. Keller's final weather update confirmed that conditions were continuing to deteriorate beyond anything that standard emergency procedures were designed to address. The microburst activity was intensifying into atmospheric chaos that could challenge the fundamental assumptions underlying naval aviation training and aircraft design. The forces affecting Fletcher's aircraft were approaching the limits of what human skill and technological capability could safely manage. As the radio carried Fletcher's increasingly desperate transmissions and the control room atmosphere grew tense with recognition that standard procedures were proving insufficient, Delilah quietly moved closer to the communications equipment. Her expression showed the kind of focused attention that suggested someone whose understanding of the situation exceeded what her position would normally require. The moment was approaching when hidden expertise might need to emerge from behind the disguise of custodial duties. The stage was set for transformation as routine training had evolved into emergency conditions that exceeded normal capabilities and standard procedures. In the shadows of the control room, Knowledge and experience that could change everything remained, concealed behind the appearance of civilian support staff, whose presence had gone unnoticed during the developing crisis. The next phase would test whether expertise could emerge when circumstances demanded intervention beyond conventional expectations. Fletcher's aircraft bucked violently through atmospheric chaos that transformed the sleek FA-18 Super Hornet into a helpless leaf caught in a hurricane's fury. The microburst cells had evolved into a maze of invisible death traps, each downdraft capable of slamming his 30-ton fighter toward the churning ocean surface with forces that overwhelmed every recovery technique his training had provided. His hands trembled against the control stick as G-forces alternately crushed him into his seat and threw him against his restraint harnesses with violence that threatened consciousness itself. "Tower, emergency, emergency." Fletcher's voice cracked through radio static that seemed to emphasize his desperation. "Stallion 27 is in an unrecoverable descent. Aircraft control is completely compromised. All recovery attempts have failed. Preparing for immediate ejection sequence." The control room erupted into coordinated chaos as emergency protocols activated throughout Whitmore Naval Air Station. Commander Walsh's calm authority became the eye of a hurricane of activity as personnel initiated procedures designed to coordinate rescue operations for a pilot who might soon be floating in storm-ravaged seas miles from shore. Emergency beacons activated, search and rescue aircraft prepared for launch, and medical personnel readied for casualties that could range from routine water survival to catastrophic trauma. "Negative on ejection authorization, Stallion 27. Walsh transmitted with command authority that cut through Fletcher's panic like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. "Maintain aircraft control and continue recovery attempts. We are evaluating all available options for emergency assistance." But the harsh reality painted by radar displays and atmospheric measurements suggested that conventional options were rapidly diminishing. The storm system had intensified beyond every predictive model, creating conditions that exceeded the design parameters of both aircraft and standard pilot training. Fletcher's situation was deteriorating into a scenario that challenged fundamental assumptions about what naval aviation could safely accomplish. Dr. Keller's voice carried scientific precision that couldn't disguise growing alarm as she provided real-time analysis of conditions that were rewriting atmospheric science textbooks. "Commander Walsh, the downdraft velocities are now exceeding 90 knots with horizontal wind shear approaching 120 knots per nautical mile. These measurements are beyond anything in our historical database. Standard recovery procedures cannot compensate for forces of this magnitude." Lieutenant Reeves had managed to maintain controlled flight by staying outside the worst microburst activity, but her radio reports painted a terrifying picture of atmospheric violence that seemed to defy natural laws. "Tower, this is Stallion 28. I have visual contact with 27's aircraft, and the turbulence is unlike anything I've encountered in 7 years of naval aviation. The aircraft appears to be dropping and climbing in patterns that suggest complete loss of pilot. Control authority." The radar operators confirmed what everyone feared through measurements that showed Fletcher's aircraft trapped in a vertical wind tunnel that was tossing the sophisticated fighter like debris in a tornado. His altitude varied from 2,000 feet to nearly sea level in oscillations that occurred faster than human reflexes could compensate. Each cycle brought him closer to ocean impact that would likely prove fatal regardless of ejection timing. Major Torres stood frozen beside the communications console, his administrative experience providing no framework for dealing with emergencies that exceeded standard procedural responses. His training emphasized efficiency and protocol compliance. But tonight's crisis demanded innovation and risk-taking that went beyond anything in operational manuals. The situation was evolving beyond his capability to influence or understand. "Perhaps we should authorize immediate ejection," Torres suggested with the uncertainty of someone grasping for solutions to problems beyond his expertise, continued. Flight in these conditions appears impossible, and pilot survival might be better served by abandoning the aircraft while ejection is still feasible. But ejection into storm conditions that were approaching hurricane intensity carried its own lethal risks. Survival in ocean waters being churned by 90-knot winds, with rescue operations impossible until atmospheric conditions moderated, could prove as dangerous as attempting to continue flying through forces that were overwhelming aircraft control systems. The choice between potentially fatal alternatives reflected the severity of conditions that had evolved beyond normal emergency parameters. Commander Walsh faced command decisions that could determine whether Fletcher lived or died, with options that all carried unacceptable risks and uncertain outcomes. Her experience provided perspective for evaluating emergency alternatives, but the atmospheric conditions were testing the limits of what naval aviation training had prepared her to handle. Standard procedures offered no solutions for situations that exceeded the fundamental assumptions underlying carrier aviation operations. Delilah had positioned herself directly behind the primary radar console, where she could observe Fletcher's aircraft trajectory without drawing attention to her presence. Among control room personnel focused on the developing emergency, her expression showed recognition of flight patterns that matched scenarios from her previous experience with extreme weather conditions, though her current position required maintaining the appearance of civilian disinterest in operational matters. The atmospheric data displayed on radar screens revealed wind patterns that she recognized from situations that had challenged the most experienced test pilots during classified programs that officially didn't exist. The microburst cells were creating three-dimensional turbulence that exceeded the design limits of conventional aircraft, requiring techniques that weren't taught in standard training curricula or documented in operational manuals. Fletcher's radio transmissions were becoming increasingly desperate as his aircraft continued its violent dance through atmospheric forces that defied his understanding of aerodynamics and flight control. Tower, I've lost all effective control. Authority. The aircraft is responding opposite to control inputs, and I'm experiencing negative G-forces approaching my physiological limits. Request immediate emergency assistance or ejection authorization. The mention of negative G-forces sent alarm through control room personnel who understood that such conditions could cause pilot incapacitation within minutes. Blood flow to the brain could be interrupted by forces that pulled pilots away from their seats, creating blackout conditions that made recovery impossible even if aircraft control could be restored. Fletcher's situation was approaching physiological limits that would make survival impossible regardless of atmospheric conditions. Dr. Keller's atmospheric analysis confirmed the worst-case scenarios that her earlier warnings had predicted. Commander Walsh, the microburst activity is creating vertical wind velocities that approach the theoretical limits of what atmospheric physics suggests is possible. We're measuring downdrafts exceeding 100 knots with recovery altitudes that may be insufficient for safe pilot ejection. The implications registered throughout the control room as personnel processed the reality that Fletcher was trapped in atmospheric conditions that exceeded both aircraft capabilities and human survival parameters. Standard emergency procedures provided no framework for dealing with forces that challenged fundamental assumptions about what naval aviation could safely attempt. Lieutenant Commander Walsh's command training had prepared her for difficult decisions under pressure, but tonight's emergency was testing the limits of conventional military leadership. The options available to Fletcher all carried unacceptable risks. While continued inaction guaranteed eventual catastrophic outcome, the situation demanded expertise and innovation that exceeded what standard training had provided to anyone in the control room. We need unconventional solutions, Walsh announced to control room personnel, whose standard training was proving insufficient for the emergency developing beyond normal operational parameters. This situation exceeds our standard procedures. and conventional recovery techniques have proven ineffective. Are there any personnel available with specialized experience in extreme weather flying? The question hung in the air as everyone present mentally reviewed their knowledge of personnel, whose backgrounds might include training relevant to conditions that exceeded normal naval aviation parameters. The atmospheric forces affecting Fletcher's aircraft required intervention techniques that existed beyond standard curricula, demanding expertise that might not be available through conventional channels. Major Torres responded with increasing desperation as he recognized that his administrative background provided no solutions for emergencies that required technical innovation beyond standard procedures. Commander Walsh, we should contact Test Pilot School at Patuxent River or perhaps the Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center. They might have personnel with specialized experience relevant to these conditions. But the timeline involved in coordinating external assistance would likely exceed Fletcher's survival window as his aircraft continued its violent trajectory through atmospheric chaos that was approaching the limits of human endurance. The situation demanded immediate intervention using whatever resources were available at Whitmore Naval Air Station, regardless of how unconventional such resources might appear. Delilah continued her positioning near the radar console while maintaining the appearance of routine custodial duties, though her attention was completely focused on the atmospheric data that revealed conditions matching her experience with situations that had challenged the most skilled pilots during classified programs. The microburst patterns were creating flight environments that exceeded normal training preparation, requiring techniques that existed beyond standard operational knowledge. The radio carried Fletcher's increasingly frantic transmissions as his situation deteriorated beyond his ability to maintain consciousness during G-force variations that exceeded human physiological limits. Tower, I'm experiencing gray-out conditions during negative G episodes. Control response is completely inverted, and I may lose consciousness within the next few minutes. This will be my final transmission unless immediate assistance is available. The stark finality of Fletcher's words sent shock through control room personnel, who recognized that they were witnessing a pilot's final moments, unless someone could provide intervention beyond conventional capabilities. Standard emergency procedures had proven useless against atmospheric forces that exceeded fundamental assumptions about naval aviation operations. Commander Walsh's expression showed the weight of command responsibility when faced with situations that exceeded normal training and procedural guidance. Her experience provided perspective for difficult decisions, but Fletcher's emergency was testing the limits of what conventional military leadership could accomplish. The situation demanded expertise that might not exist within standard organizational structures. Dr. Keller's final atmospheric update confirmed that conditions were continuing to intensify beyond anything that scientific models had predicted possible for the region. Commander Walsh were now measuring atmospheric disturbances that exceed Category 5 hurricane criteria. The forces affecting aircraft operations are approaching theoretical limits that challenge our understanding of what natural phenomena can generate. The control room atmosphere became heavy with recognition that Fletcher's situation had evolved beyond the scope of normal emergency response capabilities. Personnel who had dedicated their careers to naval aviation safety were confronting atmospheric conditions that exceeded their collective expertise and training. The emergency demanded intervention that might not be available through conventional channels. Lieutenant Reeves provided additional perspective on the deteriorating situation through her observations from outside the worst atmospheric disturbances. Tower, I'm maintaining visual contact with 27, but the aircraft appears to be trapped in a vertical wind column. That's creating oscillations beyond anything I've seen in my flying career. The pilot appears to be fighting for consciousness during extreme G-force variations. The stark assessment confirmed what radar data had been indicating through measurements that showed Fletcher's aircraft caught in atmospheric forces that exceeded human survival parameters. His situation was approaching the point where continued flight would prove impossible regardless of pilot skill or aircraft capabilities. Delilah stepped away from her cleaning cart and moved closer to the communications console, her demeanor shifting subtly as she processed information that demanded action beyond her custodial cover identity. Her expression showed recognition of atmospheric conditions that matched scenarios from her classified experience with extreme weather flying techniques that existed beyond standard training curricula. The moment had arrived when hidden expertise might need to emerge from behind civilian disguise. As Fletcher's situation deteriorated beyond the capability of conventional emergency response procedures, the control room personnel were facing conditions that exceeded their collective training and experience. While time ran out for a pilot whose survival depended on intervention beyond normal operational parameters, Commander Walsh, Delilah said quietly, her voice cutting through control room tension with calm authority that suggested someone whose understanding exceeded civilian expectations. "I believe I can help." The reaction was immediate and profound as every person in the control room turned to stare at the custodial worker, who had just offered assistance during an emergency that was challenging the most experienced naval aviation professionals. Commander Walsh's expression showed confusion mixed with desperate hope that any possible solution might exist for Fletcher's deteriorating situation. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern," Walsh replied with professional courtesy that reflected military training in dealing with civilian personnel during emergency operations. "But this situation requires specialized aviation expertise that exceeds normal civilian experience. We're dealing with atmospheric conditions and aircraft performance parameters that challenge even our most experienced pilots." But Delilah's posture had straightened with authority that suggested someone whose capabilities exceeded her apparent position as support staff. Her voice carried confidence that cut through the professional skepticism of control room personnel who were grasping for any possible solution to an emergency beyond their collective expertise. "Commander Walsh, I understand the atmospheric conditions affecting Captain Fletcher's aircraft," Delilah replied with technical precision that transformed her from invisible custodial staff to someone whose knowledge demanded attention. "The microburst patterns are creating three-dimensional turbulence that requires specialized recovery techniques not covered in standard carrier aviation training." The specificity of her technical assessment sent shock through control room personnel who suddenly recognized that their assumptions about civilian capabilities might be dangerously incorrect. Walsh's command instincts detected something in Delilah's demeanor that suggested expertise hidden behind custodial disguise, though the implications challenged everything she understood about military protocol and chain of command. Major Torres stepped forward with protective authority that reflected his administrative responsibility for maintaining proper procedures during emergency operations. "Ma'am, while we appreciate your interest in helping, this situation requires immediate action by qualified military personnel with specialized training in extreme weather recovery procedures." But Delilah's response revealed knowledge that exceeded anything Torres's administrative background had prepared him to evaluate or understand. "Major Torres, the conventional recovery procedures you're considering will prove ineffective against downdraft velocities exceeding 90 knots with horizontal wind shear, creating forces that overwhelm standard control authority compensation." The technical accuracy of her assessment struck control room personnel like physical blows as they processed the reality that someone they had dismissed as civilian support staff possessed understanding of atmospheric conditions that exceeded their own expertise. Walsh's expression showed growing recognition that conventional assumptions about capability and authority might be preventing access to knowledge that could save Fletcher's life. "Ma'am," Walsh said carefully, her tone reflecting command instincts that detected expertise beneath civilian appearance, "your technical knowledge suggests experience beyond normal civilian aviation background." What exactly is your qualification for understanding these atmospheric conditions and their effects on military aircraft performance? Delilah's reply would transform everything that followed, as hidden expertise prepared to emerge from behind. 18 months of custodial disguise. The moment had arrived when Fletcher's survival might depend on shattering assumptions about capability and authority that were preventing access to knowledge essential for managing emergencies beyond conventional parameters. Commander Walsh, Delilah said, with authority that carried decades of experience with situations that challenged the limits of human skill and aircraft performance, I can fly him out. The silence that followed was complete and stunning as control room personnel processed the impossible claim that custodial staff could accomplish what their most experienced pilots couldn't safely attempt. The atmospheric conditions had proven beyond conventional capabilities, while Fletcher's situation continued deteriorating toward fatal conclusion. The moment demanded decision-making that could shatter protocol while potentially saving lives that conventional procedures couldn't protect. The laughter that erupted from control room personnel was harsh and immediate, born from stress and disbelief at hearing such an audacious claim from someone whose janitor's coveralls and cleaning cart marked her as completely unqualified for military aviation emergencies. Major Torres led the skeptical chorus with derisive sounds that echoed off the control room walls. His administrative mindset, unable to process the possibility that custodial staff could possess expertise relevant to atmospheric conditions that were challenging the most experienced naval aviators. "Ma'am, with all due respect," Torres managed between bursts of nervous laughter, "we're dealing with an FA-18 Super Hornet trapped in atmospheric conditions that exceed the capabilities of pilots with thousands of hours of carrier aviation experience. This isn't a civilian aircraft or a training simulator. We're talking about flying through hurricane force, microbursts that are literally tearing aircraft apart at the molecular level." But Commander Walsh's command instincts had detected something in Delilah's demeanor that transcended the skepticism radiating from her subordinates. 21 years of military leadership had taught her to recognize expertise regardless of its packaging, and the calm certainty in Delilah's voice suggested knowledge that demanded investigation rather than dismissal. Her expression showed growing curiosity about someone whose technical assessments had proven remarkably accurate throughout the developing emergency. "Mrs. Vasquez," Walsh said carefully, using the name from Delilah's identification badge while studying her with increased attention, "your understanding of atmospheric conditions and aircraft performance parameters suggests experience beyond normal civilian background. Before we dismiss your offer, perhaps you could explain your qualifications for making such an extraordinary claim." Delilah reached into the worn leather purse that had accompanied her custodial duties throughout 18 months of careful observation and meticulous investigation. Her movements carried deliberate precision as she withdrew credentials that would transform everything the control room personnel believed about capability, authority, and the nature of expertise itself. The identification card she placed on the communications console looked ordinary enough until scanner verification began revealing classification levels that exceeded everyone's security clearance. Petty Officer Rodriguez operated the security verification system with routine efficiency until her computer screen began displaying access codes that triggered automatic alerts throughout the base security network. Her expression shifted from casual compliance to stunned amazement as classification protocols activated systems designed for personnel whose capabilities exceeded normal military parameters. "Commander Walsh," Rodriguez announced in a voice barely above a whisper, "Mrs. Vasquez's credentials are showing military clearances classified above our access level. The system is requesting verification through Naval Test Pilot School Command for someone designated under Phoenix Protocol Executive Flight Authority." The silence that followed was profound and complete as every person in the control room processed the implications of Phoenix Protocol designation. Within naval aviation circles, Phoenix Protocol represented legendary test pilots whose achievements remained classified decades after completion, involving aircraft and atmospheric conditions that exceeded normal operational parameters. The designation was whispered about in advanced training programs, but never officially acknowledged or documented in accessible records. Major Torres's reaction revealed someone whose carefully constructed understanding of military hierarchy was collapsing under the weight of impossible revelations. His face drained of color as he recognized that his dismissive attitude toward Delilah might represent the most serious error of his administrative career. Phoenix Protocol authorization carried authority that exceeded his own command structure, involving personnel whose capabilities transcended normal military classifications. "That's impossible," Torres whispered with the desperate tone of someone watching their professional world disintegrate around them. Phoenix Protocol pilots are legendary figures from classified programs that operated decades ago. There's no way that a custodial worker could possess credentials from test pilot programs that officially never existed. But the security verification system continued confirming authentication codes that proved beyond doubt that Delilah's credentials were genuine and current. Commander Walsh approached the communications console with growing recognition that she was facing a situation that challenged fundamental assumptions about identity, capability, and the nature of military authority itself. Dr. Keller moved closer to observe the verification process with scientific curiosity about security protocols she had never encountered during her years of atmospheric research. The classification levels being displayed exceeded anything in her experience with military programs, suggesting involvement with projects that operated beyond normal oversight and documentation procedures. "Commander Walsh," Keller observed, "with academic precision, Phoenix Protocol designation appears to involve clearances that exceed standard naval aviation command structure. The authentication procedures suggest personnel whose capabilities and authority transcend normal operational parameters." The radio crackled with Fletcher's increasingly desperate transmissions as his situation continued deteriorating beyond human survival limits. His voice carried the strain of someone fighting atmospheric forces that exceeded physiological endurance, while negative G-forces threatened consciousness that would make recovery impossible regardless of outside intervention. "Tower, this is my final coherent transmission," Fletcher managed through communication equipment that was barely functioning under extreme atmospheric stress. "I'm experiencing blackout conditions during negative G episodes, and aircraft control has become completely random. Unless immediate assistance arrives within the next few minutes, I will lose consciousness and impact the ocean surface." The stark finality of Fletcher's situation provided urgent context for the remarkable developments unfolding in the control room as hidden expertise emerged from behind custodial disguise. Commander Walsh faced command decisions that could determine whether Fletcher survived, with conventional options exhausted and time running out for intervention that might save a pilot's life. Delilah removed her worn baseball cap and reading glasses as transformation began that would reveal identity concealed behind 18 months of careful observation and meticulous investigation. Her posture straightened with authority that commanded immediate attention from personnel who had dismissed her presence as irrelevant to military operations. When she spoke again, her voice carried confidence forged through decades of experience with atmospheric conditions that challenged the limits of human skill and aircraft performance. "Commander Walsh, contact Naval Test Pilot School Command and request immediate verification for Captain Delilah Vasquez, designated callsign Phoenix 7, she announced with authority that cut through control room skepticism like a blade through silk. "Inform them that Phoenix is requesting operational authority for emergency atmospheric recovery in extreme microburst conditions." The transformation was remarkable and complete as the confused custodial worker disappeared, replaced by someone whose bearing and voice commanded respect from everyone present. Torres stared at her with expression of someone watching their understanding of reality collapse, while Dr. Keller initiated verification procedures with hands that trembled slightly as she processed the possibility that she had been working alongside one of naval aviation's most legendary figures. The response from Naval Test Pilot School Command was immediate and unambiguous, confirming what the security verification had already established beyond doubt. Captain Delilah Vasquez was authorized for any flight operations necessary to preserve naval aviation personnel, with all military resources directed to provide complete cooperation with her operational requirements. "Ladies and gentlemen," Commander Walsh announced with voice that carried weight of someone whose understanding of the situation had fundamentally transformed, "you are in the presence of Captain Delilah Vasquez, whose service record includes establishing atmospheric flying techniques currently used throughout naval aviation. Captain Vasquez, what do you require from us to save Captain Fletcher?" Delilah moved toward the flight operations console with fluid confidence of someone returning to familiar territory after extended absence. Her transformation from elderly custodial worker to commanding aviation expert was so complete that several personnel had to remind themselves that this was the same person they had been ignoring for 18 months of routine cleaning duties. "First, I need real-time atmospheric data and direct radio communication with Captain Fletcher," Delilah explained as she reviewed weather displays with obvious familiarity. "Second, I need immediate access to backup aircraft with performance specifications suitable for extreme weather recovery operations. Third, I need a crew chief who understands that we're about to demonstrate flying techniques that exceed normal operational parameters." Torres made one final desperate attempt to maintain control over a situation that had evolved beyond his administrative authority and technical understanding. "Captain Vasquez, with respect for your credentials, the atmospheric conditions exceed safe operational limits for any pilot regardless of experience level. Perhaps we should coordinate with specialized rescue units rather than attempting operations that could result in additional casualties." Delilah paused in her preparation to fix Torres with a stare that had once reduced experienced test pilots to respectful silence during safety briefings that determined whether experimental programs continued or terminated. "Major Torres, I've been flying through extreme atmospheric conditions since before you entered naval service. The techniques required for this recovery operation were developed during classified programs involving weather patterns that exceeded anything in your operational experience." The authority in her voice left no room for further debate as she continued preparations that would demonstrate capabilities developed during decades of pushing aircraft and human performance beyond conventional limitations. Her pre-flight assessment revealed knowledge of atmospheric flying that existed nowhere in current training curricula, based on experience with situations that had challenged the most skilled pilots during programs that officially never existed. Fletcher's radio transmissions were becoming sporadic, as his consciousness wavered under G-forces that approached human survival limits. "Tower, I'm experiencing intermittent blackout during negative G cycles. Aircraft attitude has become completely unpredictable, and I may lose radio contact within the next few minutes." The urgency of Fletcher's situation provided critical context for the preparations taking place as Delilah coordinated resources necessary for a recovery operation that would challenge both aircraft capabilities and human endurance. Her mission planning demonstrated understanding of atmospheric conditions that exceeded standard meteorological training, based on experience with weather patterns that challenged fundamental assumptions about what naval aviation could safely accomplish. "Commander Walsh, I need access to FA-18 tail number 547, which completed proper maintenance procedures under supervision that meets my standards," Delilah announced as she reviewed aircraft availability with professional assessment that evaluated readiness criteria beyond normal operational parameters. The aircraft systems must be configured for extreme weather operations using specifications that may not appear in standard technical manuals. Walsh nodded with growing respect for someone whose legendary status was being confirmed through every action and decision. Captain Vasquez, Aircraft 547 is available and will be prepared according to your specifications. What support personnel do you require for this operation? The preparation for Delilah's rescue mission proceeded with military efficiency as personnel who had been skeptical of her capabilities moments earlier now competed to provide the best possible support for someone whose legendary reputation was being validated through demonstrated expertise. Her pre-flight inspection revealed knowledge of aircraft systems that exceeded current training standards, while her mission planning showcased understanding of atmospheric flying that existed beyond conventional operational knowledge. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez approached Delilah during final preparation with fascination about observing techniques that existed in advanced training theory but had never been demonstrated under actual operational conditions. Captain Vasquez, the atmospheric recovery methods you're planning to use aren't documented in any current training curricula. Are these techniques that were developed during your previous service? Delilah smiled with warmth of someone who appreciated professional curiosity from younger aviators, eager to learn from experience that couldn't be gained through conventional training programs. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, the techniques I'll be using were developed during classified test programs that challenged the boundaries of what atmospheric science suggested was possible. Understanding how to safely exceed those boundaries requires experience that exists beyond standard training parameters. The maintenance crews completed aircraft preparation under Delilah's supervision with meticulous attention to specifications that exceeded normal operational requirements. Her knowledge of aircraft systems reflected decades of experience with machines designed to operate beyond conventional performance limitations, requiring modifications that weren't covered in standard maintenance procedures. Dr. Keller provided final atmospheric analysis that confirmed conditions were continuing to intensify beyond anything that scientific models had predicted possible for the region. Captain Vasquez, the microburst activity is now generating forces that exceed theoretical limits for atmospheric disturbances. We're measuring downdraft velocities approaching 120 knots with horizontal wind shear that challenges our understanding of natural phenomena. Delilah reviewed the atmospheric data with expression that showed recognition of patterns from her experience with conditions that had tested the limits of both human skill and aircraft capabilities during classified programs. Dr. Keller, these atmospheric conditions are severe but manageable using techniques developed for exactly these types of extreme weather scenarios. The key is understanding how to use the storm's energy rather than fighting against forces that exceed conventional control authority. The radio carried Fletcher's final coherent transmission as his situation deteriorated beyond the point where continued consciousness could be maintained under G-forces that exceeded human physiological limits. Tower, I'm losing consciousness during negative G cycles. This will be my final transmission unless immediate assistance arrives. Aircraft control is completely compromised, and I estimate impact within 15 minutes. The Stark timeline provided urgent context for Delilah's mission as she completed final preparations for an operation that would demonstrate atmospheric flying techniques that existed beyond conventional training. Her coordination with control room personnel revealed expertise that had been hidden behind custodial disguise, while her mission planning showcased capabilities that transcended normal operational parameters. Commander Walsh, Delilah announced as she prepared to depart. For the flight line, I'll be maintaining radio contact throughout the recovery operation. The techniques I'll be demonstrating may appear to violate standard flight procedures, but they're based on principles that were proven during classified programs, involving atmospheric conditions that exceeded current operational experience. The transformation from custodial worker to commanding aviation expert was complete as Delilah moved toward aircraft 547 with confidence that reflected decades of experience with situations that challenged the fundamental assumptions underlying naval aviation operations. Her mission would demonstrate that expertise and innovation could emerge from the most unexpected sources, while proving that assumptions about capability and authority were sometimes dangerous limitations that prevented access to knowledge, essential for saving lives. Control room personnel watched with mixture of amazement and apprehension as someone they had dismissed as invisible. Support staff prepared to attempt a rescue operation that exceeded the capabilities of conventional emergency procedures. The atmospheric conditions remained beyond standard operational parameters, but Delilah's preparation suggested confidence, based on experience with weather patterns that most pilots never encountered during normal careers. Fletcher's aircraft continued its violent dance through atmospheric chaos that defied conventional understanding of aerodynamics and flight control, while time ran out for intervention that could prevent catastrophic impact with ocean waters being churned by hurricane-force winds. The next phase would determine whether hidden expertise could accomplish what standard procedures had proven incapable of achieving, as legendary capabilities prepared to emerge from behind the disguise of ordinary civilian employment. Delilah's FA-18 Super Hornet cut through the storm-ravaged night sky with precision that seemed to mock the laws of physics governing atmospheric disturbances. The microburst cells that had transformed Fletcher's aircraft into a helpless victim became navigation aids in her expert hands, as she demonstrated techniques that existed beyond conventional understanding of what human pilots could accomplish. In extreme weather conditions, her radio communications maintained professional calm that provided confidence to everyone monitoring. What they understood was an extraordinary demonstration of capabilities that transcended normal operational parameters. Phoenix 7 approaching intercept coordinates, Delilah transmitted with authority that cut through atmospheric static and control room tension alike. I have visual contact with Stallion 27 and am beginning atmospheric analysis for recovery procedures. The radar operators watched in amazement as Delilah's aircraft navigated through microburst activity that had proven impossible for conventional flying techniques. Her flight path curved and twisted through three-dimensional turbulence with movements that appeared choreographed rather than reactive, suggesting understanding of atmospheric patterns that exceeded standard meteorological training. Each maneuver demonstrated expertise developed during classified programs that had pushed the boundaries of what atmospheric science suggested was possible. Fletcher's aircraft remained trapped in vertical wind columns that continued tossing. The sophisticated fighter through altitude variations that exceeded human survival parameters. His radio transmissions had become sporadic as consciousness wavered under G-forces that approached physiological limits, while his flight controls responded randomly to inputs that conventional training suggested should maintain aircraft stability. Stallion 27. This is Phoenix 7. Delilah's voice carried across radio frequencies with calm authority that provided immediate psychological relief to a pilot whose situation had exceeded his capability to manage safely. I'm positioning for atmospheric recovery assistance using specialized techniques. Follow my radio guidance exactly, and do not attempt conventional recovery procedures. The control room personnel listened with fascination as Delilah began coordinating a rescue operation that demonstrated flying skills that existed beyond current training curricula. Her instructions to Fletcher revealed understanding of aircraft performance under extreme conditions that exceeded anything documented in operational manuals, while her own flight through microburst activity showcased capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about what naval aviation could accomplish. Commander Walsh monitored the developing rescue with mixture of professional curiosity and command responsibility as she observed techniques that were being demonstrated for the first time under actual operational conditions. Phoenix 7. Please provide operational status and assessment of recovery feasibility. Delilah's response revealed confidence based on experience with atmospheric conditions that most pilots never encountered during normal careers. Tower. Atmospheric conditions are severe, but manageable using energy management techniques developed for extreme weather operations. Recovery will require coordinated maneuvering that exceeds standard training parameters, but successful outcome is achievable with proper execution. The radar displays showed both aircraft moving through microburst activity with patterns that defied conventional understanding of flight safety and atmospheric navigation. Delilah's FA-18 carved precise trajectories through turbulence that had overwhelmed Fletcher's control authority, while her radio guidance began teaching him techniques that existed beyond his training preparation but proved immediately effective for managing impossible conditions. Stallion 27. Reduce power to minimum sustainable thrust and allow aircraft attitude to respond naturally to atmospheric forces. Delilah instructed with technical precision that revealed decades of experience with situations that challenged standard operational procedures. Do not fight the turbulence. Use downdraft energy to maintain controlled descent while I coordinate formation positioning for tandem recovery. Fletcher's response carried growing confidence as Delilah's guidance began providing control authority that conventional techniques had failed to achieve. Phoenix 7. I'm experiencing improved aircraft response using your recommended procedures. The violent oscillations are moderating, and I'm maintaining better altitude control than I've achieved since entering this weather system. The success of Delilah's initial intervention sent excitement through control room personnel, who were witnessing atmospheric flying techniques that existed in theoretical discussion but had never been demonstrated under actual emergency conditions. Her ability to navigate extreme weather while simultaneously coordinating Fletcher's recovery showcased capabilities that transcended normal pilot training and experience. Dr. Keller provided real-time atmospheric analysis that confirmed the extraordinary nature of what they were observing. Commander Walsh. Both aircraft are operating in microburst conditions that exceed safe parameters by factors that challenge our understanding of flight safety. Captain Vasquez is demonstrating atmospheric navigation that appears to violate fundamental principles of aerodynamics and weather flying. But Delilah's techniques proved that innovative approaches could safely exceed conventional limitations when based on understanding that transcended standard training preparation. Her formation flying through extreme turbulence demonstrated coordination between aircraft that seemed telepathic in precision, while her radio guidance continued teaching Fletcher recovery methods that existed beyond normal operational knowledge. Stallion 27. Begin gradual power increase while maintaining formation position relative to my aircraft. Delilah instructed as both fighters carved synchronized paths through atmospheric chaos that had seemed impossible to navigate safely. The turbulence patterns are creating lift opportunities that we can use for controlled ascent if timing and coordination are precise. The radar operators confirmed what visual observation was suggesting through flight paths that showed both aircraft climbing steadily through microburst activity that had previously driven Fletcher toward ocean impact. Delilah's atmospheric navigation was transforming impossible conditions into manageable challenges through techniques that demonstrated mastery of weather flying that exceeded conventional understanding. Fletcher's radio transmissions carried amazement as he experienced control authority that conventional training had suggested was impossible under such atmospheric conditions. Phoenix 7. These techniques are unlike anything in my flight training, but aircraft response is becoming predictable and manageable. I'm maintaining formation position and experiencing stable flight characteristics despite continued turbulence. The successful coordination between both aircraft provided dramatic demonstration of what expert knowledge could accomplish when applied to situations that exceeded standard operational parameters. Delilah's rescue operation was proving that innovative techniques could safely challenge conventional limitations while achieving outcomes that standard procedures couldn't provide. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez observed the developing operation with professional fascination about atmospheric flying that existed beyond current training standards. Commander Walsh, Captain Vasquez is demonstrating formation coordination in extreme weather that challenges everything we understand about flight safety in turbulent conditions. These techniques should be impossible according to standard atmospheric flying theory. But theoretical limitations were proving irrelevant when confronted by expertise developed during classified programs that had pushed aircraft and pilot performance beyond conventional boundaries. Delilah's demonstration was rewriting understanding of what naval aviation could accomplish when innovative approaches were applied to atmospheric conditions that exceeded normal operational experience. Tower, this is Phoenix 7. Delilah transmitted as both aircraft continued their coordinated ascent through microburst activity that was moderating as they climbed beyond the worst atmospheric disturbances. Recovery operation is proceeding successfully. Both aircraft are achieving stable flight characteristics, and we are approaching altitude where conventional recovery procedures can be resumed safely. The control room atmosphere shifted from tense emergency monitoring to amazed observation of what was becoming a textbook demonstration of advanced atmospheric flying techniques. Personnel who had been preparing for catastrophic casualties were instead witnessing a rescue operation that showcased capabilities they hadn't known existed within naval aviation. Major Torres watched the successful recovery with expression that combined relief for Fletcher's safety with recognition that his administrative understanding of naval aviation had proven woefully inadequate for evaluating emergency situations that exceeded standard procedures. His dismissive attitude toward Delilah had nearly prevented access to expertise that was proving essential for saving a pilot's life. Phoenix 7. This is Tower. Commander Walsh transmitted with professional respect that reflected growing appreciation for capabilities that transcended her own command experience. Please provide assessment of when both aircraft can safely return to standard recovery procedures. Delilah's evaluation demonstrated understanding of atmospheric conditions that existed beyond standard meteorological training. Tower, current altitude provides sufficient separation from microburst activity for standard approach procedures. Recommend vector both aircraft to emergency recovery. Pattern with priority handling for medical evaluation of flight crews who have experienced extreme G-force exposure. The successful rescue operation proceeded with military efficiency as both aircraft approached Whitmore Naval Air Station using conventional procedures that seemed almost mundane after this extraordinary demonstration of extreme weather flying that had saved Fletcher's life. Ground crews prepared for landings that would mark the conclusion of an emergency that had tested everyone's understanding of what naval aviation could accomplish under impossible conditions. Fletcher's landing was precise despite physical exhaustion from G-forces that had approached human survival limits during his encounter with atmospheric conditions that exceeded aircraft design parameters. His aircraft touched down with minimal deviation from centerline approach, though medical personnel stood ready to address potential physiological effects from extreme turbulence exposure that could have lasting health implications. Delilah's landing demonstrated the same precision that had characterized her rescue operation, with aircraft control that suggested someone whose expertise transcended normal pilot training and experience. As her FA-18 taxied toward the maintenance ramp, ground personnel gathered to observe someone whose legendary reputation was being confirmed through demonstrated capabilities that existed beyond conventional understanding. The post-flight debriefing revealed the complete scope of the crisis that had been resolved through intervention that exceeded standard emergency procedures. Fletcher's medical evaluation showed physiological stress consistent with extreme G-force exposure, but no permanent Damage from atmospheric conditions that could have proven fatal without immediate rescue assistance. Captain Vasquez, Fletcher said as he approached Delilah during the initial debriefing process. The atmospheric flying techniques you demonstrated tonight saved my life using methods that weren't covered in any training I've received. How do I begin to thank someone who accomplished what seemed completely impossible? Delilah's response carried humility that reflected someone whose satisfaction came from successful mission accomplishment rather than personal recognition. Captain Fletcher, you maintained aircraft control under conditions that challenged experienced pilots throughout naval aviation history. Tonight's rescue succeeded because you followed guidance, precisely while demonstrating courage that enabled innovative techniques to prove effective. The investigation that followed revealed the complete truth about systemic problems that had been hidden behind administrative efficiency and bureaucratic manipulation. Major Torres's focus on schedule compliance had compromised safety protocols designed to prevent training exercises from exceeding safe operational parameters, while his dismissive attitude toward technical expertise had nearly prevented access to knowledge essential for emergency response. Commander Walsh initiated comprehensive review of training procedures and emergency protocols that would ensure atmospheric flying techniques demonstrated during Fletcher's rescue became integrated into advanced pilot education throughout naval aviation. Captain Vasquez, the methods you used tonight represent capabilities that should be available to all naval aviators who might encounter extreme weather conditions during operational deployments. The cultural changes that followed Delilah's demonstration extended throughout naval aviation commands worldwide as training programs began, incorporating atmospheric flying techniques that had proven effective under conditions that exceeded conventional operational parameters. Her rescue mission became required study material for advanced pilot training, demonstrating that innovation and expertise could emerge from unexpected sources when circumstances demanded exceptional performance. Dr. Keller approached Delilah during final debriefing with scientific curiosity about atmospheric navigation that had challenged fundamental assumptions about weather flying and aircraft performance under extreme conditions. Captain Vasquez, the techniques you demonstrated tonight appear to violate established principles of flight safety in turbulent weather. Are these methods documented anywhere that could be accessed for research and training development? Delilah's explanation revealed knowledge developed during classified programs that had pushed the boundaries of atmospheric science and aircraft performance beyond conventional understanding. Dr. Keller, the techniques I used were developed during test programs that explored atmospheric conditions exceeding normal operational experience. The principles can be adapted for current training curricula while maintaining operational security. For methods that remain classified. 6 months after the rescue mission, the complete truth about Delilah's investigation finally emerged through official channels that confirmed what her custodial disguise had been designed to accomplish. Her 18 months of observation had documented systematic problems with training safety protocols that were compromising pilot welfare throughout naval aviation commands, requiring intervention that exceeded conventional oversight mechanisms. Lieutenant Carmen Vasquez had died in a training accident that resulted from inadequate emergency procedures and administrative pressure to maintain training schedules regardless of safety considerations. The official investigation had concluded that her crash represented unavoidable equipment failure, but Delilah's undercover investigation revealed negligence that had prevented proper emergency response when atmospheric conditions exceeded standard operational parameters. The civil litigation that followed resulted in comprehensive reforms to naval aviation training safety protocols, ensuring that administrative pressure could never again compromise pilot welfare through shortcuts that prioritize schedule compliance over aircrew protection. Delilah's investigation had prevented additional training accidents, while exposing systematic problems that threatened pilots throughout naval aviation commands. The memorial service for Lieutenant Carmen Vasquez could finally include complete truth about her service and sacrifice, honoring both her dedication to naval aviation and the safety improvements that her death had ultimately inspired through her mother's determination to prevent similar tragedies. The ceremony recognized that expertise and courage could emerge from unexpected sources when circumstances demanded intervention beyond conventional parameters. My daughter believed in naval aviation training that prepared pilots for the most challenging conditions they might encounter during operational service. Delilah said during the memorial dedication that established new safety protocols throughout naval aviation commands. By ensuring that training operations maintain the highest safety standards, we honor her memory while protecting future aviators who deserve preparation that prioritizes their welfare alongside mission effectiveness. The base commander's office, where Delilah received final recognition, was decorated with photographs of aircraft and pilots, spanning decades of naval aviation history. Commander Walsh presented her with official commendation for rescue operations that had saved Fletcher's life while demonstrating atmospheric flying techniques that were revolutionizing training throughout naval aviation commands worldwide. Captain Vasquez, Walsh said as she presented recognition that reflected growing appreciation for capabilities that had transcended conventional understanding. Your actions during the hurricane rescue demonstrated remarkable skill, but your investigation of training safety protocols represents even greater service to naval aviation. How many lives do you estimate have been saved through the reforms that resulted from your undercover work? Delilah accepted recognition with satisfaction that came from knowing her daughter's death had contributed to meaningful improvements in naval aviation safety protocols. Commander Walsh, I hope the safety reforms prevent enough training accidents to honor Carmen's memory. She died believing that naval aviation training would prepare her for any emergency she might encounter. By ensuring that training operations maintain proper safety standards, we fulfill that promise for future aviators. The final revelation was both devastating and redemptive as the complete scope of Delilah's sacrifice became clear through official recognition of her undercover investigation. Captain Delilah Vasquez, legendary test pilot whose innovations had established atmospheric flying techniques used throughout naval aviation, had been forced to disguise herself as custodial staff to investigate the administrative negligence that had killed her daughter. The pilots who had dismissed her capabilities during 18 months of custodial work were flying aircraft whose performance parameters she had established using techniques she had developed during classified programs that officially didn't exist. The atmospheric flying methods that had saved Fletcher's life were innovations she had created during test programs that had pushed the boundaries of what naval aviation could accomplish safely. Years later, when young pilots asked about the origins of extreme weather flying techniques that saved lives under impossible atmospheric conditions, their instructors told them about Phoenix 7, the pilot who proved that expertise and dedication recognized no limitations except those imposed by administrative prejudice and bureaucratic assumptions. Captain Delilah Vasquez's legacy continued influencing naval aviation long after her final flight, reminding everyone that true capability emerged when courage and innovation were applied to challenges that exceeded conventional understanding. The storm that had threatened to claim Fletcher's life had instead provided opportunity for justice and redemption, washing away administrative negligence while revealing expertise that had been hidden behind the appearance of ordinary civilian employment. Sometimes the most dangerous storms cleared the air by exposing truth that had been concealed beneath layers of bureaucratic deception and procedural inadequacy. In the end, the dismissive laughter that had greeted Delilah's simple declaration had been transformed into respectful recognition as 30 elite naval aviators watched her accomplish the impossible while simultaneously exposing administrative failures that had cost precious lives. She had proven that legends never truly retire, but simply wait for moments when their expertise becomes essential for accomplishing what others believe cannot be done. Phoenix 7 had demonstrated that the sky belonged to those who understood its mysteries, regardless of the uniforms they wore or the positions they appeared to hold. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.